La da 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 da. Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Are you out there?
Okay, and this is the Jameel Rawls show. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking into some information regarding metaphysical breakdowns of film, music, magazines, books. Some of the greatest movies start off with a book, and I want to explain to the fans a little bit about how a movie is created. Before you can hire an actor to do anything at all, you have to have a script. Same thing with music. Now I'm going to come back to the film, but I want to make a brief analogy on the side real quick. I want to ask my fans when I want my fans to know this, the listeners to know this. When you have a song, guess who has all the rights to it? Think for a minute. It's not the performer. It's not the musicians or whoever's doing the instrumentals or the DJ or the rock band. It's not even the producer. When a song is created and an artist does a professional song or even an unprofessional song, you have underground music out there. Who gets all the credit? The writer gets all the credit. In the music industry, the writers have all the rights to all the music. Everybody else just gets points to the music. Whoever's song it is, whoever wrote it, or whoever wrote the rap, whoever freestyle, whoever was behind it, whoever constructed the lyrics, owns the song. A lot of times people see rappers and DJs and producers and drummers and lead singers. No. The writer has all the rights to the music. In a film, you have to have a script. Whoever owns the script, whoever created the script, whoever constructed the script, is where the acting, where the talent is gonna inseminate from. So if you have an actor or an actress, they're not even gonna be in the picture. They're not even gonna be in the picture unless there's a script. And the director, a lot of the times, may not even know the writer. The director may not know the writer. Oftentimes, the director and the writer will never communicate. If you see a script writer at a movie set, there's something going wrong. Okay, there's something going wrong. And this is a Jameel Rawls show. We're going to be real with you. If you see a script writer at the movie set, something just went wrong. Because a writer does not need to be anywhere near the film. Okay, unless the director is the writer, of course. But so you have the script, then you have the talent, then you do the hiring. You get the people to play the little parts and whatnot. So now oftentimes the scripts are based off of books. There's a lot of wonderful movies out there in action, comedy, horror, have you whatnot, that are based off of books. A lot of people see television shows like Batman and they say, well, Batman, But Batman's an ancient story that's been passed down through generations. There's stories of Batman going back to the 1800s, for Christ's sake, if you know, for crying out loud. Okay? And so, you know, I want to bring up some films that really interested me. One of the films that really interested me, and I'm going to decode it metaphysically a little bit with you today, is the film Demolition Man with Wesley Snipes. And for those of you who weren't around in the early 90s, Wesley Snipes at that time was like the Samuel L. Jackson of today. Wesley Snipes was in almost every movie you can imagine, from Passenger 57 to Jungle Fever to Tu Wong Fu to New Jack City, you know, Demolition Man, and he just came out. Wesley Snipes was in so many movies in the early 90s, you know, so many movies. And so just like Eddie Murphy was. But so anyhow, Demolition Man, there's a part in Demolition Man where they say, "What is your boggle? What is your boggle?" The boggle is so close to a Google. The boggle is so close to a Google, right? You know, it's very, when it comes to words and terms in the entertainment industry, things get really interesting. Like if you say MTV really fast, MTV, it sounds like empty. You know, MTV's in that disrespect, MTV is a great show. You know, I did a lot of research on MTV years ago, and I remember when they came out with that, you know, what was that, TV Killed the Radio or whatever? Wasn't that really MTV's first time coming in back in somewhere around the 84, somewhere around there? But okay, so what's your boggle? Sounds a lot like Google. You find a lot of interesting things in some of these older movies. One of the funniest things about Sylvester Stallone also co-starred. You know, Sylvester Stallone was the main character, of course, and Wesley Snipes was the countermain, but they both played about an equal part in the film, I would say. A good guy and a villain story, bad guy, good guy, cops, cowboys, Indians, type of thing. So now in the film, they were sealed through cryogenics. They were cryogenically sealed in a time capsule, much like Walt Disney's rumored to have been cryogenically sealed. Right? Okay, so through cryogenics, they seal Wesley Snipes and Sylvester Stallone because Sylvester Stallone was looked at as being sort of like a bad cop, a rough cop. He made too many bad decisions. And Wesley Snipes was looked at, you know, that's kind of like a lot of cops want to be super cops and go out there and catch all these guys, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of thing he wanted to be like some super cop or something. And Wesley Snipes, of course, is the villain, so they both get sealed. Wesley Snipes gets sealed in cryogenics. Sylvester Stallone gets sealed in cryogenics. And then when they come back in the future, oh my, no toilet paper, they use seashells. Taco Bell was the only restaurant that made it through the revolution or something like that. So everybody eats out of Taco Bell, but Taco Bell is luxurious. And there was a part of the film where Sylvester Stallone made a comment saying, you know, I waited all these years, you know, I was frozen for 50 years or something, and I come back and I go out to Taco Bell, you know. And so then he has sex with a woman, and they don't have sex anymore. As people have sex, they were having virtual sex, and all the babies are like test tube babies and clones and whatnot. So the film, you know, I remember seeing this film back in the early 90s. I remember my mother had took me, and maybe, hell, who knows, maybe Razor was there too. But I went to go see this film, and I remember watching the film, and I walked out of the movie theater like, that was really funny. And I saw Wesley Snipes' hair had that little gold tint to it, that little blonde tint to it. And then around the same time, there was another movie that I saw at the same movie theater, matter of fact, called Meteor Man. And I remember in the movie Meteor Man, they all, the lords, the Golden Lords, or the baby, there was a gang called the Golden Lords that were trying to basically crucify Meteor Man. And Meteor Man was being followed around by the baby lords, and they all had it. So there was a cross reference from Demolition Man with Wesley Snipes over into Meteor Man with the baby lords and whatnot. So these sort of films, and I remember I was doing back when I did my channeling sessions on back when I did using my channeling sessions. I used Meteor Man one time as one of the pictures to do it from. But so going back to Demolition Man now, it's kind of funny because in the early 90s, the crime rate was a lot higher than it is today. Maybe in small towns the crime rate is more than what it used to be, but for the major cities, the crime rate went down a lot. If you compare, in the movie they were talking about South Central Los Angeles, and the crime rate has went down very drastically since the early 90s. Same thing in Chicago. Matter of fact, I remember doing some statistical research and discovering that in the 70s, I think it was like 1974, in the city of Chicago, which, Chicago is a city of cities, just like any other city, it's like any other major city, but in the city of Chicago, there was around 1,000 murders. There was over 1,000 murders in 1 year in 1974, somewhere around there, I believe. And I was doing statistical research at this time, studying group consciousness, and I was saying, wow, in the city of Chicago in 1970 something, there was over 1,000 murders. But now in today's world, Chicago will have 400 and something murders, and everybody will say it's the murder capital. And I'll say, wait a minute, that's a good thing. I mean, it's not a good thing 400 and something people were murdered, but it's a good thing that it wasn't 1,000 people, though. So, compared to what it used to be, the streets of America are a lot safer. So when people always, that's what Demolition Man referenced, the crime in Demolition Man's era, which was the early 90s. When he came to the future, the crime wasn't nothing as compared to what it used to be. And it's kind of funny because I'm looking at today's world, the crime has gone down a lot. There's not nearly, I remember, Detroit still has a lot of crime, but people used to get killed over a pair of tennis shoes in Detroit. People used to get murdered executioner style over a pair of Michael Jordan jump shoes in the early 90s in Detroit. But the crime has gone down across. You look at cities like New York, it's a lot safer than it used to be. And so the Demolition Man was a very interesting movie, and I used to go back and talk about film and movies with different sorts of people, and matter of fact, I want to make another comment on that. The crime used to be so bad in New York, even the gangs became the police. There's a famous street gang in New York known as the Guardian Angels. I believe they might still be around in some capacity, but they're not what they were at that time. But the Guardian Angels was a street gang that used to go on the subways in New York and used to walk the streets of the Bronx and Brooklyn and Harlem and stop crime. People who mugged people and stole wallets and purses and were basic, street gangs that, that's basically what street gangs do, do vandal activity and whatnot. There were street gangs who started protecting the regular citizens of the city from the other gang. That's how bad the gang crime was. Street gangs became the police. And so, the Guardian Angels would go out, they'd have their coat and go to the subways back in New York, back in the 70s and 80s and whatnot. and actually stop crime, stop people. They might not take them to jail, but they would stop the incident from occurring. So crime actually, so maybe prevention activity like that, things like that, lower the crime level a little bit. There's a lot of activity, I'm going back to that time in my life, and so so that just reminded me. I just want to bring that up. But the Demolition Man was a fascinating film, and I used to love it. I used to look at, I remember I used to sit back on HBO. I used to sit back on HBO and just watch all these movies, the gang movies and stuff. And I could relate to what was going on in Demolition Man at that time. I'm not trying to drag this point out, but I remember back in the early '90s. Again, you had the violent era. You had a lot of films like Ice Trespass with Ice-T, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society. Again, Juice, one of my favorite films. And so, young black males at that time had a lot of light on them, a lot of spotlight on them. Coming out of an era where black women took most of the attention in the entertainment industry, in the super late 80s and early 90s, young black men took all the attention. Eazy-E, all the little rappers and stuff in the early 90s, and they were talking about how violent it was in the ghetto. Then a lot of other rappers who didn't even have anything to do with the ghetto used it as an image to get popular, so it became a fad. And so in the early 90s, you had a lot of that. There was a lot of violence and imitation of violence and media violence. And I remember watching and thinking, wow, man, these guys aren't too much different than like you see a movie like The Goodfellas with you see a movie like The Goodfellas or a movie like that, and these in the early 90s, some of these movies, it was the same kind of stuff going. It just looked different. It was from an urban culture of black youth doing it, and so, like movie South Central, these guys are writing on walls and whatnot with cans of paint and stuff. And so that's sort of what the Demolition Man spawned off of, the violence of the inner city at that time. They put these guys in cryogenics. They come back, and when they come back hard, man. They come back hard. They were going at it. Sylvester Stallone, Wesley Snipes, and so that's an interesting film to watch. I don't in today's world, I like movies from the 1960s. I like movies from the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. I don't really like movies. I don't really like any modern new movies. I'm still watching movies. I'm still reading newspapers from the 40s. I read newspapers from the 1940s and 50s. When people talk about the president's going to do this, I'm still listening to, you can go online and listen to phone conversations Kennedy had, or things Eisenhower was doing, or Truman. I don't, I'm more into I'm still listening to what people were saying 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago. But so now we're going to look more. Now we're going to look at something new. We're going to look at something new. And this is the Jameel Rawls show, and this is a real show. And we would like to have some realistic people on, and we'd like to be able, to gather some donations in the process, right? And so if anybody can donate, feel free to do that. But one of my most favorite films is the film Car Wash with Richard Pryor, the original Car Wash. That was such an interesting film. That was a really interesting film. What's some more? That was a 70s film. Let me figure out an early 90s film. I'm going back to, I keep thinking of these horror movies. There was a movie, Friday the 13th. And in the first one, Jason wasn't the killer. Jason's mother was the killer. And then Jason comes back in the second one with the Ku Klux Klan uniform. Remember, he had the white sheet with the eyes cut out, with the eyes stitched out? And that's what the old Ku Klux Klan used to wear. when you see the Ku Klux Klan at parades and stuff, and they have these really, you see the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, the Imperial Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and they got these nice press iron, they got the press ironed Ku Klux Klan guys got the press iron sheets and all, stitched up, silk sheet. They weren't, the original Ku Klux Klan guys just took some old bed sheets and stuff and made some holes in them. They didn't put too much thought in it. And so that's what Jason on Friday the 13th looked, you can see it dressed up like a Ku Klux Klan, man. And it's kind of interesting, like, wow, man, this guy, you got a Klansman running around chopping people up and stuff. That was one of my most favorite. There was one of the Nightmare on Friday the 13th they had with the New Blood, which was a girl who was psychic and she had telekinesis and she could move stuff. And she played in another film which was shot in Hollywood back in the 80s, of course. And the film was called Hell is for Children. And it was about a woman who was trying to rescue young prostitutes from pimps. And she was and the girl that starred in the New Blood was a hooker, a young hooker in Hollywood. And this woman was running around trying to save all the young hookers from the pimps. And the cops were coming down on her because she was interfering with the police business, with the hookers and the pimps and stuff. And so, but I remember, I didn't even know this girl played this part. I just seen her in the New Blood, the Friday the 13th. And this was the first time, when I saw this film, this was the first time that Jason ever had any real opposition. Jason's only real opposition was somebody with a blowtorch or a 45 or something, or a 30-06 or whatever. And so when I saw this girl doing telekinesis and moving stuff around, I'm like, man, what's going on, man? She's not supposed to be able to do that. Jason's no match for her. And I had a best friend. This is an 80s movie. But I didn't see it till the early 90s. I was born in 85. Hell. And so I had a best friend at the time. One of my best friends. Razor growing up was my best friend. This was another guy. This is a white guy. And me and him were really good friends. He lived out where I went to school, ended up going to school at in high school and stuff. And me and him were great friends. We used to stay at each other's houses all the time. We used to go trick-or-treating with each other, eat candy and whatnot. And he would eat we used to have so much fun, man. I'm thinking back, man, me and that guy used to have so much fun, man. And he used to, I helped him. I remember he was moving from one house to the other, and I used to go with him to back and forth from his house, as his father was in the construction business, and PlayStation had just come out, and we were like wizards at video games. We loved these little Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat games. And then when PlayStation came out, this guy had all these Japanese fantasy games, and this guy turned into some sort of Japanese fantasy expert or something. He was doing animation cartoons and all this stuff, and I used to trip off of it. I remember going to his house, and he would have all these posters of like Ghost in the Shell and all this stuff, and Akira or whatever, and he'd be watching Dragon Ball Z and all this. I'm like, man, you're tripping, man. Like you're tripping out. And so, like, you need to slow your roll a little bit. He would be, his mind, man. This guy was trying to teach himself Japanese, and of course, I speak Japanese myself. I speak a little Japanese, right? Right, and I had a Japanese friend growing up as well. Matter of fact, he was a good friend of mine, and he taught me how to count. Ichi, ni, san, yan, go, ruku, nana, hache, ju, kyu, jueji, ni, konnichiwa. He would say, I would hear him, he would get in arguments with his friends. They would say, baka is stupid. And it was my grandfather who explained to me that baka was the greatest insult you could ever give a Japanese person. In Japan, even if two people get into a car accident, they get out and they bow. My grandfather lived in Japan for a period. He explained this to me. And he would say, in Japanese, calling somebody stupid is a tremendous insult. It's a really bad thing to do, because he said respect is everything in Japan. He said in Japan, two people will bow to each other, fresh out of a car accident. Even if they're in opposition, they bow first. There's immediate respect paid in Japan between people. And so growing up, I had a Japanese friend, and Razor used to come around. Razor did the soundtrack for the Jameel Rawls show, of course. But Razor would come around, and Razor would be hyperactive, yelling. And Razor would use all this. Razor used so much slang when he talked. All Razor knew was slang. That's all Razor knew was slang and mischief and doing wrong and whatnot. And so Razor would come around with all this slang and all this stuff. And my Japanese friend would just, my Japanese friend was like quiet, respectful, very law-abiding. Japanese people are extremely law-abiding, and far different culture, Eastern culture, very respectful people. And Razor would come around, and he'd be cussing and stuff. And these Japanese people didn't really get. These Japanese people had a bad interpretation of black people or African based off of Razor. They look at Razor, and Razor would come in swearing and stuff. It was funny. It was really Razor was funny, and so. And so we're gonna be looking. What was I saying? Okay, so I had a friend. We were going watching the movies, the Japanese anime, and the Japanese cartoons and whatnot. And we were looking into all this stuff. And my friend. So this was a period. Where I had really started learning different sorts of art, how to appreciate different art. Going back to these older movies and whatnot. We're watching movies. I had a good friend of mine, and Halloween we go eat candy and stuff. And I would sit there, and I would trip off of other people. I would watch other people. How they learned, how they paid attention to things, what their interests were. And man, we would go out. We'd just go out for hours. I remember we used to go out for hours, man. Hours riding bicycles, riding bikes. And that's all we wanted to do was just go out and just ride bikes for hours and hours and hours and hours. And looking back now, that a lot of people were. My perception of society now and then is maybe there was more. There was a feeling that there was a lot more fear then about the world. People seemed, maybe I don't know, because my mindset has changed so much. But there seemed to be a lot more fear at that point in time in the world. Maybe that's just my mindset. Who knows, or my observation or whatnot. But so we used to go over there and watch Friday the 13th, the New Blood, where those girls doing all this stuff, psychic ability and whatnot. Man, we used to sit there and just watch these horror movies for hours. We used to just watch these movies for hours and hours and hours. Hours and hours and hours and hours. And absorb information, absorb knowledge out of these films. Absorb knowledge. What else I'm trying to think. I got caught in the zone for a second thinking about that period, about that era. I'm trying to think, what else were we really interested in at that time? I was gonna say the research that I learned to do over the years, the alternative research that I've learned to do, is giving me new insight into humanity and the perspectives. Has somebody explained a lot of the stuff I know now to me then, my life would have been completely different. Maybe, at that time, the internet was around, but nobody was really, not that many people really used it. In today's world, there's so much more information available. You can just Google something and figure something out almost instantaneously. Now it's going to take quite some time. I mean, not back then it would take quite some time. Now you can just break something down quick. You can just Google something and figure it out instantly. Figure it out instantly. The technology that's available today, it was around then. We used to sit. I remember one time, same guy I was telling you about, a good friend of mine. We were sitting in a room, in his bedroom, and we were about like in the 5th grade. We were just playing video game stuff and talking and eating candy and stuff. It was around like Halloween time, and he had a journal. And I told him at the time, I said, "You know what, man? They got technology out there that can read your journal in your room." And we were talking about that, and he would be like, and at the time it sounded so crazy, like some Star Trek stuff, but in today's world, that's very believable. In today's world, that becomes believable. A lot of the concepts and the conditioning, a lot of the ideas that people have in today's world, people would have been afraid to speak it back then. I remember, had I been the age I am now, in 1994 or something, I wouldn't have had nearly the tools I had. I wouldn't be able to present shows and all this stuff on it. I had to be at a radio station, and at that time it was much more difficult to present the type of research that you can present today online. And I think a lot of people, I wouldn't have been able to explain the stuff. Had I lived back then, I probably wouldn't have known as much about these subjects that I do now either. But had I been the age I am now back then, of course. But I remember you couldn't, I'm saying 1994, if you would have walked up to somebody and started talking about esoteric knowledge and symbols and whatnot, they would have listened to you a little bit, but it would have went way over their head. Way over their head. It would have went way over their head. Way over their head. And so that's one of the things that's happened from that period to this period, is technology has been able to incorporate the world of the mysterious and the hidden into everyday life. It's one of the things I'm grateful for. Now, this is just an intro. I'm just talking right now. This is me. There's no interview. There's no guest now on the show. I'm just rapping a little bit. And so I'm going to get off of here. But we're going to look. That was what's your boggle. Something made me bring that up. What's your goggles at Google? Just like wait a minute. Just like there was a musician group where they had some lyrics that said, "And my red iPhone, and my red iPhone, and my red iPhone." There's music and things in the entertainment industry back around the 80s and the early 90s, throughout the 90s, that people didn't know what they meant then, but now that we're in today's world, now it's making sense. Now it's